have those questions, have those things that they're just not quite sure about. They want to be an ally, or you're starting from scratch, or you're already on a journey. And it's like, who do I ask? Where do I go other than to the computer? And hopefully what I do makes that a little bit more tangible, accessible, and real. And again, I just want to empower people, you know, to do and say things that make, number one, you do that you feel good, and you feel good about your own self, and then what happens also in your workplace and in your communities. So a little bit more about me. I am an educator through and through. I have, this is almost 17, 18 years of public school educational experience. And my degree is in fine arts. So I have a bachelor's in fine arts, and I studied art history and education as well. It's like, well, how did I get to this work other than being an authentic part of the community? My services really started out of holding on to my story. First of all, I held on to a story of being outed and feeling just not truly like myself, and really surviving a lot of trauma from being outed, which I'll talk a little bit about today. I held on to that story. And then what also happened in some years ago, I was sitting in a meeting, an educational meeting, public school, and we were having some suicide awareness training. And what occurred in this training for the first time ever, and I'd sat through these meetings for many, many years, there was a slide specifically for LGBTQ youth that they are 200 to 300% more likely for suicide and self-harm. And that day in that meeting, many years after being outed, many years after coming through a lot of trauma, being married, having my first child, I recognized at that moment when I saw the slide, a couple things. Number one, I needed to start telling my story. Not because I needed anybody to feel badly for me of what I went through, but I know that the story can help in many different ways. And the other thing I realized is there's a slide on its own in this big presentation about this, yet this is the only thing that we're hearing. We're not doing anything about it. We're not trained on how to support our LGBTQ youth, and so on and so forth. So what I did is I did start the only training for teachers, administration, school professionals in a public school district here in the area, a very large one. I started it at my school at the time 5 years ago. And over the last couple of years, I have been working with the district to expand that. So our teachers and our staff and our people that are interfacing with our youth understand how to hopefully support and keep these kids safe. Now, what happened in the corporate sense is I just had a lot of friends in business, and they said, Susie, can you come and talk about what you're talking about in schools? Can you come to my business? Can you come and help us understand how to change our policies, how to really be inclusive, be active allies? And I said, sure. So it's kind of a very, very quick version of how I got from A to B in this journey of my work. And I just really feel like there's a really great opportunity for businesses and communities to fill a little bit of a gap that's happening in the diversity and inclusion world. So quite often we are really focused on, as we should be, conversations about race, intersectionality of different diverse communities, and so on and so forth. And we need that, and we need to continue for sure. What I found in my research, and then moving into the more corporate space, is that there are some inclusive policies for LGBTQ plus people. And that happens to be the checkbox most companies are checking, saying we are inclusive, we are active for our LGBTQ community. But actually, there's not a lot of education out there. So where is actually the formal education, the difficult and wonderful conversations about the community and workplace practices? And there's a little bit of a gap there, and that's where I come in. So it's just a little bit about me. And yes, I'm also a working artist, as I mentioned my art background, and I always just say I'm multi-passionate. So you meet me, I could talk to you about a bunch of different things for a long time. So we've got limited time, I'm just gonna keep on going. So that's just a little bit about me. Some of my norms that I have. So I have a new version of the Vegas rules. So the Vegas rule, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, here, what I kind of say is what is said here stays here, and what is learned here leaves here. So that's just to make sure that you do feel very safe. And we are coming from a bunch of different viewpoints, a bunch of different backgrounds, and we're all on different places, in different places with our journey. And I want to acknowledge that. So really what you're saying here, I want you to feel like you can say it, you can ask it, and you're safe, and we're gonna all respect this space we have here together. And then what you learn here, please take it to somebody. Say something, talk about it, do something. I'm going to actually challenge you at the end to do something. And then FAQs. So normally they're the frequently asked questions. Here, generally, they're the fearfully asked questions, the questions you just don't want to necessarily ask anybody else, ask me. And I'm just one person. I'm one representative of a very large community. And if I don't know something or I feel like it's not quite right, I'll make sure I find out and I'll get back to you. So those are my norms. All right, so some data. Here we go. We're going to really get into the meat of things of, okay, why is inclusivity important? And I'm going to go broad. I have a workplace data point, a youth data point, and it revisits a little bit of what I just said, and then kind of an interesting data point that is somewhat jarring and shocking. So I do want to let you know that the last one on this slide may be a slight trigger. And also in any part of the conversation, if you need to turn your camera off, step away, you know, you're more than welcome to do that. That happens quite often. We're not in a full training. So I think most of us will feel okay. Now, this I leave in my presentation on purpose because until June this year, June, excuse me, of 2020, about half of the LGBTQ people in the US, so 52%, lived in states where you could be fired, passed over for a promotion, refused training, harassed on their jobs, and this could happen with no protection for 52% of our LGBTQ people in our country until June. The Supreme Court ruled that federally, you cannot do that anymore. And I could speak as I was as a public school educator who worked for the state of North Carolina as an LGBTQ person for 17 years. There were no protections for me if something came up. Now, I do leave that up because, and this is not to polarize anything with where anybody is sitting on things. The reality is with how the Supreme Court is changing, this may not actually stay in place. And so I do want you to be aware of it because this really affects how people feel they can show up to work, be their authentic selves, feel like they can be extra productive, feel like their voices are going to be heard and amplified, and really just stepping into a place where you're comfortable. So I hope that this remains somewhat antiquated and somewhat taken care of, but we do need to, as business people in our communities as well, need to recognize that this is a real fear point for a lot of your LGBTQ peers. Next, this is going into youth again, and I'll come to why I've mentioned it again. So LGB, the T's not there on purpose for right now, youth are almost five times more likely to attempt suicide compared to heterosexual youth. And the T is not included for transgender, because the attempts of suicide and self-harm are actually at a more larger rate, higher rate, excuse me. And the reason I bring up the youth again is as people in business, who is going to be the next workforce? Youth. So our workforce is ever evolving, and our workforce also is going to be more diverse, not just LGBT diverse, but more diverse than any other generation coming in. So Gen Z right now is I just read a new study. It's like 48% of Gen Z coming in and up into the workforce have at least one or more diversity points. So also these people coming into the workforce, we need to be more inclusive and equitable, but the millennials and Gen Z are looking for impact-based companies, and companies that do have active, not just policy, active policies, active ERGs, and so on and so forth. So the youth, how to not just now show up for this youth and help them remain safe, feel safe, heard, educated, to then move into our workforce it is a very important point. Now, this last one again is a little bit jarring, so I just want to mention this. So this last statistic, it's now being talked about a little bit more, which is good, but the statistic is terrible. In 2020 so far, we've still got a couple months left, advocates have tracked at least 34 deaths of transgender and gender nonconforming people in the US. And this is fatal violence. And the majority of these deaths have been Black and Latinx transgender women. I thought 2019 statistic was terrible at 26. It was about 26. We're at 34 and we still have a little bit of time in 2020. Why is this important? This is affecting a lot of people in your workforce. And so thinking about intersectionality of diversity and inclusion, this is something that we really need to acknowledge, learn more about, think about, and have some discussions about. So these are more broad statistics, and I want to keep on going into just, I have 3 more and then we'll get into some other things about the workplace here. So let's talk about LGBTQ inclusivity in the workplace a little more specifically. So the number one reason LGBTQ workers don't report like negative occurrences, something that's going on to a supervisor, a manager, somebody in leadership, or even HR, because they really do not feel anything's going to be done about it. So while again, we can say, or your company can say, or the people you're working for, you're making these the policies are in place. We need all levels of leaders to be active and to really stand behind their authentic self. How do they present themselves to the diverse workforce so people do know that they are safe to say, hey, there was this infraction, or hey, this is how I felt about this. And this is just when it's a negative occurrence. Imagine if you feel like you can't even say something like this to a supervisor, what about feeling confident enough to come with an idea or to have a discussion about something else? So this is, and all of these statistics right here from the Human Rights Campaign, I'm happy to share. There's a workplace, a big study, many pages that I've extracted some of this from. So, and then 45% of LGBTQ workers agree with the statement that the enforcement of a non-discrimination policy is dependent on the supervisor or leader's personal views of LGBTQ people. So there's a fear-based thing happening here. So there's going to be a disconnect of, we've got the policy and we have people in leadership that hopefully are really behind these policies, but there's a disconnect in people feeling like, I don't know, is it really going to work? Can I say something? Can I be me? Can I show up as my authentic self? How is that really going to be perceived? Not only by peers, but leadership. And then 1 in 10 employees have heard their own leader say something negative about LGBTQ people. And so one that's just disturbing, it's not an alarming high rate, but 1 in 10, is something to be noted. The thing that gets me here is this statistic, and I've followed a lot of things for many years already. This statistic hasn't really changed much for 12 years. So again, that note on what the progress is on paper, but where is the progress and the action in the culture? And so I wanted to leave you with that. Let's get into allyship. So that's well, here are some things about, data points. I could go on. I have pages of data. And I'm not super a numbers person, but I really like these numbers because it helps communicate the points. So why? And I've mentioned it a couple of times already. When an employee or a peer or community member doesn't feel like they can truly show up as their authentic self, they are in fear, they don't feel included, you don't feel like things are equal for them, of course the productivity is going to go down. So you're not going to be as focused as an employee. Your productivity suffers, your creativity suffers. And when you start having these things being consistent, not just among LGBTQ people, think about the intersectionality and amongst other communities. What does that wind up doing? It breaks down a lot of things in your company, and then that affects the bottom line. So I know in business here, we're thinking about our bottom lines, and we need to. That's what keeps us going. Your people fuel that, and we all know that. And so what can we do? So tiptoeing into just a little bit of allyship. And again, like I said, today I'm going real fast through a lot of broad topics. But authentic allyship is something that I say, not just ally or not just allyship. It's authentic and it's active. So active allyship is very different than being an ally. So what are some things that are included or could be thought of to help you become more authentic or active? Education is definitely something that can help you. Sitting in some discomfort, having conversations, being accountable, helping amplify people's voices. And so where under each one of these, I could speak for a long time on each one of these. So thinking about you, number one, how you show up for you in your life and what you represent in diversity, if anything, which a lot of us do. And then how do you sit with, and I'll get into the next kind of list, it kind of just keeps going, but how do you sit with what you have? So what we have generally is our privilege. What privileges do we have and what we don't have? And so then within the privilege, can you feel like you can pay that forward in action? I'll get more into that in a second. But thinking about some of these categories, you know, how does that translate? So generally, I'll say when you feel a little sticky and uncomfortable, that discomfort in having a conversation, recognizing an action that you may have done or you have witnessed, starting then a discomfort, an uncomfortable conversation, because generally that means you're being active. Doesn't always have to feel like that. It usually feels pretty good when you're being active. But what are those things, and how do you hold yourself and others around you accountable? I'm going to give you some really specific tips, like looping back to this list in just a little while, actually. But I wanted to provide you this, and this list could be expanded. I would love for people to say, well, add this to this, or I would add that to being active and authentic. Yes, add to it. This is just a general guide. Now, what are some roadblocks in becoming or continuing to be an active ally? Well, number one, it's all a journey. So we're either already on the journey, trying to continue our journey, changing our journey. I feel like it's this ever evolving thing. And when we think about allyship and the things that we're really passionate about, and it may not be the LGBTQ community, it could be many other things or a combination, I find that people get very overwhelmed. Like it's got to be this big, huge thing all at once. Well, we want that because a lot of us feel like it's too late. Like, come on, let's get going. You know, let's keep going. But what I can tell you is one voice makes a difference. One action makes a difference. And then you gain the confidence to continue the work. If we set ourselves up for things that are just unrealistic, if it's a company-wide thing or a personal thing, a team thing, a leader thing, we have to just set realistic goals. And I think Amanda even said this, taking care of ourselves. I will admittedly say I have a really hard time with that because I just want to go, do, you know, and just talk and teach and all that. But if we do not step back and take care of ourselves, how are you really going to show up as the ally, as the active ally for other people? So taking that time to take a moment, to take a break, to just decompress, to think, reflect, and then continue your work. That's another little side note. Now, some roadblocks here. So these words right here, these are not unique to the conversation about LGBTQ people. This is classic diversity and inclusion language. I'm sure a lot of people with businesses have been through many trainings with these words right here. The training and the education is the one thing. It's what do we do with it? Again, back to that action. So thinking about your unconscious bias, ingrained bias or implicit bias, another way of that, your privilege, your fear, and your confidence. Often with the privilege talk, we need to acknowledge our privilege. I think there's sometimes this thing where because we want to set it aside. It's not meant to be defensive, but it comes off as defensive, but we set it aside or we then understand it now. And what do we do with it? Sometimes with the privilege, you sit with a lot of guilt and fear. Is that doing anything for anybody else outside of yourself? If you're sitting in your own privilege, in your own then shame and fear or guilt, we need to accept, acknowledge, and say, okay, the privileges I have, how could I project that forward to make a positive impact on something I'm passionate about and not backing down from that? For example, I recognize I am a feminine presenting white female. So in the LGBTQ world, of just the LGBTQ, my own community of privilege, and in general community, our society, I recognize just because of the way that I am presenting myself, my expression, okay, I'm higher on the privilege scale. I don't agree with the fact that some people will listen to me based on this more than others. I don't agree with it. So I need to say that, I need to use it, and I need to then pass the mic. That's an example. You know, I was asked to do a talk on some diversity and inclusion things, and I did wind up getting the job. And I'm not saying this for, see, this can be performative. I'm gonna give you some more language. I'm gonna use this as an example and not performative of saying, oh, good job, Susie, you did that. I don't know. I'm using this just as an example, as a tangible, if somebody needs it. So I was asked to do a talk on some diversity and inclusion, and I was going over a call, and I call all of the points, and I said, you know, I actually don't know if I'm the best person for this. Let me give you some names of other people, okay, that are not like me. And why don't you talk to them, and you can decide what to do. So it was really up to the people of what they wanted to do. And again, I don't tell anybody that. I'm telling you that for an example, because then if you do some action, and hopefully you are, and then you want the praise, that's still rooted in privilege, and that's performative allyship. So taking the time to have the risk, you know, to have some of the fear, to have some of the recognition of privilege, and paying those things forward. And again, going back to some of the other terminology, sitting in some discomfort, and I just said the word risk. And this is what I challenge a lot of businesses to think about. Because, oh, if we say this or we do this, it might, I don't know, we might lose clients, we might lose followers, we might, okay, well, what is the risk? Are you going to risk continuing a culture that may not live up to what you want it to? Are you gonna, so where is the risk involved, specifically with finances for some businesses? And I know sometimes those are, and a lot of times those are really, really hard conversations and decisions to make, but I just wanted to put the word risk out there for you as well. Checking time, I'm good. All right, talking fast today. Could go a lot more. So I'm gonna go into a few authentic ally tips or active ally tips. I'm gonna go into a little bit of a challenge, and then I actually think we'll have a good amount of time for some Q&A. I haven't looked at the chat at all, and I would love to open up the floor to ask me anything specific you want. And I'll share a little bit more about my story before I wrap up as well.
So, Susie, real quick, we don't really have any questions in the chat, just some dialogue. So you're
okay.
Good to go.
Great. I hope it's good stuff. Good. All right. So this is something like, well, what could I learn here today? And I know that's something great with on the menu of like, we're going to talk about something, we're going to do something, and let's take some things away. So this is one of my favorite things. And I actually spoke about this yesterday on a panel about what happens when you hear or see something like a microaggression or even a macroaggression. You know, those terms also are becoming a little outdated, but when you are seeing or hearing something that you just know is not right, the silence generally has been the default for so long. So number one, say something, do something, whatever it is, just don't say, oh, that's going to be a really sticky conversation. Have it. That automatically, even if you fumble through what you're trying to say, you're doing something. And here's how I have adopted this. It's not mine. REI is not the store, is the Racial Equity Institute. How about calling someone forward instead of calling someone out? So if you hear somebody say something and be like, that is ridiculous, you know, just kind of going on the attack. Hey, you know, I overheard that, or, I mean, I know we're on Zoom world, or, hey, I noticed, you know, getting in touch with somebody. Hey, can you jump on a call? I noticed in that meeting, I'm just really surprised that you said that. Could we talk about why you said that or why that happened so I can understand where you're coming from? I'm very uncomfortable with that, but I'm really doing, and put it on yourself. Like, I'm really doing work to make sure that I follow my active ally instincts. I would love to, you know, just have a conversation about this. And so that's just one example, but it's the way that you're framing instead of going on the attack. Now, I'm very passionate, and I will tell you how I feel about a lot of things. With subjects in diversity and inclusion, I do believe, and we don't always need to be nice. Okay. A lot of us have been through a lot of things where we don't know anybody being nice anymore. Okay. Ever, period. That's a bold statement, but, and not a but, and, there are other ways, especially for people in a privileged situation, beginning some more, or continuing the active ally journey. And usually I think it's the workplace or in the community or a side comment of like, oh, that's so gay, okay, well, hey, I'm really uncomfortable that you said that. Could you just tell me why? And then you kind of catch people and they'll actually stop and think about it and you have a conversation. That's just one example. I've had people around me, for example, saying, well, you don't look gay. Well, what does that mean? That's a microaggression right there. And then, but it's always been silent. And sometimes when we're trying to explain ourselves over and over and over again, and again, I'm in a privileged situation to do that, it does get exhausting. And so actually having a colleague or somebody come up or say, like, I really didn't agree with that. I'm actually going to be talking to them about that, things about that. So calling people forward, and I'm happy to work with people one-on-one, get in touch with me on how to make that more specific to your team or your business. So invest in company-wide initial and continuing education. So avoid the check mark is what I'm kind of saying. So avoid the check mark or the checkbox. Oh, our company has, in the statements, our company has 700 hours in diversity and inclusion training. Great. After that statement, list the actions. What have you changed? What are you doing? How are you involved? And then that avoids the checkbox. And again, this comes back to my point of specifically for my community, I have found more policy statements than actual education to understand. I mean, part of what I do is, what does LGBTQIA2S, all of the stuff, the plus, what does it actually all mean? And how does it change? How do you need to know that for your workplace? Things like that. Where is the education? And not only the one time, but what's continuing? So something I love to do with people I work with, for example, is do the training or do sessions and then have follow-ups to provide the space and time to ask follow-up questions, work through even more scenarios, things like that. So it's not just a one and done. How many of us here have been to trainings and you get so excited, and some of us go out and do things, I know that. You get so excited and you have all these ideas and then it just ends. It just ends. And those that are in the privileged leadership, whatever position of privilege you're in, it can't end, because we need you very badly, especially in the workplace. This is really specific to LGBTQ, little active ally tip I give a lot. Greet groups of people with neutrality. Good morning, team. Hey, Frontier. Even if it's kids that you work with, young people, I have a first grader and a 2-year-old. I cannot tell you to hear good morning, boys and girls, every morning. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. What unfortunately you've done, and it's okay, it's a mistake until somebody says it, and some of you recognize what I'm about to say, that's binary. So you've excluded anybody that is not a binary person by saying boys, girls, ladies, gentlemen, it's completely binary. So anybody with neutrality, good morning team. If it's a class, good morning, level 1 or whatever it is, try those greetings. And we can do that here on Zoom. However you greet people in your meetings, your teams, the more neutral you go, the safer, the better. And I will tell you, those people that are in a gender that is that identify with a gender that's not binary, they will pick up on that. So you don't need to tell anybody about that you're doing that, but it's just something that people can pick up on. Sponsor LGBTQ focused organizations and events. So put your money and time where maybe your mouth is, people will say. But when I say sponsor, a lot of times people think it's just about money. It's not. How could you offer to volunteer? I know right now is hard, but how could you volunteer with an event? So your company's sponsoring or you're sponsoring, but what does sponsorship mean? Hey, we really would like to donate our time. more, this year, what could we do to show up for you? Sometimes there's just groups that they have read books to young LGBTQ people, or do some job coaching with LGBTQ people. What could you do? An intern program specific for a diverse group. I'm sure there's many companies already doing that. But what does sponsorship mean? And so I really want to almost open that space. That sponsorship, I feel like, has been this thing with money, only money, but it can mean many other things. Of course, review your workplace documents and policies for inclusivity. Most companies have done this. I know that there's a lot of work, and how do you make things a little bit more neutral? I had a document come past me with something last week, and I sent a quick text and I said, says him, her. It should be they, them, just really quick, like a nice little calling forward. I wasn't so blunt. I just said, hey, I noticed this. This is how I would change it if you're looking to be more neutral. And it was changed within 30 minutes, so easy tip there. And something that you could do if you are not already, and this, I go more in depth with this with some of my sessions, pronoun use. It is absolutely okay and acceptable to use pronouns if you're not in the LGBTQ world. And even us that are, we're all getting used to pronouns. Why are they important? Well, because it really helps somebody feel like themselves, especially in the transgender or gender nonconforming community. When you feel like all you have out there are he, him, and she, her, and when somebody recognizes, if you've transitioned, to use those, yes, binary, or they, them, something more neutral, and there's many more pronouns. It's kind of like this acknowledgement of respect for the person, learning their pronouns, understanding pronouns, and then for you using them, it can be a signal of safety. Oh, I emailed so-and-so, I don't know them, but their pronouns are there. Well, they got it together. They know something, there's some respect there. Now, what I would say to be careful of is and I actually changed this conversation for myself as an expert out there. I would say, everybody should have their pronouns, in their email signature as in a company. Well, here's the deal with that. I actually know. I would have as an option, because if you mandate that and somebody actually is questioning their gender identity or going through a transition and maybe you don't know yet, or they're not ready to share yet, you don't want to have to, number one, maybe have somebody out themselves, or two, just feel so disengaged and kind of away from what their real identity is. So I would actually be careful mandating something like that. But just how do you start using it? Kind of like I did now, I put mine in my slide, but hi, I'm Susie Silver, she, her pronouns, I'm an artist, speaker, and just you keep on going with it. And the more that you can practice, whether it's just in the email, it's in how you address people, that's up to you. But that's a little one that you could start testing out here and there. And, it's something worth thinking about. So those are just a few of my ally tips. I'm going to give you a little challenge, and then we'll wrap up and have some extra time here for questions and, a few things. So active ally practice. So commit to adding at least one new active ally practice into your life within the next 30 days. So what does that mean? Of course, I would love it to be LGBTQ specific. There's a lot of stuff that we need to be active allies for, and a lot of people. So not just, but people. We are talking about people here, and how you can show up more for the people in your life. And one really easy practice is actually assessing who is in your life. Do you have if you want to be a diversity supporter within your own life and in your workplace, who is around you? Who have you learned from? Who is not around you? You can start with yourself. Think about your own messages and memories. So that's that bias, the unconscious and implicit bias. Start reflecting on your own, and then think about, okay, I know me, I see what I have around me, I see what I do every day, I see what I've contributed. How could I enhance that? How could I open up another lane? How could I ask a question? How could I read a book? How could I have a conversation? So think of something that's attainable. Maybe some of you will be able to do it, and maybe find somebody to hold you accountable. I saw some people chatting here. So in the chat earlier on, I'll come back to it. Maybe you could say, hey, I'm going to totally do this. And I do know that I love when I do hear from people, and hey, I was in a session. I did this. I just wanted you to know, I love it. Get in touch with me about it. And remember, we're not perfect. We're not perfect. If something happens and it goes awry, just acknowledge it. If you need to apologize to somebody, do it and just say, sorry, and I'm going to do better. Do not project on somebody else, so they have to tell you it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just say, hey, Susie, I recognize I used the wrong pronouns the other day. I take responsibility for this. I'm going to do better next time, and I fully support you. You can just be done with that. So not projecting your shame and guilt on somebody else, but recognize we're not perfect. We are not. And this is a journey of allyship. And so what I was just saying, I've mentioned it before about performative, and even giving that example of my experience. I sit in the middle with this because I do like to hear from people being active. I want to know what you tried. I want to know what you tried that worked. I want to know what tried that didn't work so I can help you figure it out for next time. And sometimes we actually do need to say, hey, I did this thing. I know it felt good. And I feel really excited because sometimes when you can say out loud what you've done actively, it helps you feel more confident. You feel more empowered. So you're going to do more. And then it's kind of magnetic where you can bring some other people into that world. So there's this balance between performative and not. And I'm happy to help support you in that. So just kind of in closing, and then I'll put my my information up here for you. I want to thank you for your time and your space with me today. Part of my story, as I mentioned, I was outed. Which means somebody very close to me, my family, disclosed my sexual orientation to others in my family without my consent. And what happened in the full story is a large amount of trauma, mental health issues, and not really knowing where to go from when that happened. And I happened to be in my late 20s. I was not a teenager. I was not somebody young, and I had a great support system, and I was able and privileged enough to gain mental health support. The reason I tell you that is I decided to use the story to pay it forward, to open conversation, to be vulnerable so I can hopefully help others. And again, not in a good job, I'm sorry for what you went through, just so we can move forward in our community, in our businesses together. And I have chosen to take that story and consider it surviving immense trauma, which I can share another time, and redefining my purpose. And so I welcome the opportunity to work with you. I'm going to hang on. I'm going to come off the screen in just a second so I actually can see the full the gallery view and everybody. Please get in touch with me. With Pride Consulting is my company. I've been doing this for about 4 years and really just excited about the next chapter with it. So you can find me through email, my website, or LinkedIn. I have social media. It's just getting going because I'm like, let's do the work, and then I'll post about something on social media another time. But I would really welcome the chance to work with you one-on-one, a small group, a large group. And I do want to thank you, Amanda and the team, for allowing me to have this space today. And a fun little note, I will be back in January, but on the artistic side of things. I'm going to be doing a workshop in January about creating for wellness. But it's also a good time if you come to that one that I can check on your Active Ally Challenge. So if you want to join me again in January, please do so or get in touch with me. And then I will come off this screen and just welcome what you all have to say. And thank you. I can go in the chat now, or somebody can tell me. Take a sip of water.
No, I think you're good, unless you got any private DMs. We kind of just chatted a little bit, no real open-ended questions. Thank you so much for creating this space for us to ask questions. At this point, everyone has been muted, but if you have a question for Susie, please, if you're feeling comfortable, unmute yourself and ask it. Or you can drop it in the chat too, whichever.
Putting the website there for you as well, and my email. And yeah, I just am really excited about being able to connect with people. It's been very special. And I really know that there are a lot of people out there with the best of intentions, specifically for the LGBTQ community, but really just don't know how to get into that tangible action and have so many questions and just don't know where to go. And again, I mentioned it, I am one little speck of a very large community, but I am hoping to open more up, especially our business community is amazing here. And so it's just really important to be part of something positive. And it doesn't always go as planned. And I've had some really hard, difficult conversations, but I welcome that because that's how we get to understand each other more. Just typing in here. I spell my own stuff wrong all the time. So if I did, you'll figure it out. I might have inverted a letter. Well, thank you so much. And I will stay on just for a moment and with everybody from Frontier, but if you wanted to hang back because you had something specific to say, please do so. Please feel free to email me. And thank you. Thank you. I hope it's not the last time that I see you all. If anybody's attending Innovate Raleigh, I will be at Innovate Raleigh later today. I'll be hosting a table of some sort. I'm not quite sure, so you may pop in the table, but that is this afternoon. So I will see you there, some of you.